College football picks presented by Shell. I'm Chris Hassel. Final week of the college football regular season, and we have picks for every ranked game. It is rivalry week, and you never know what might happen. Seems to be 7, maybe 8 playoff hopefuls at this point. That 8th team only has one more game. That would be Alabama in a must-win in the Iron Bowl. The last time Alabama entered the Iron Bowl with 2 losses was way back in 2010, and it was an all-timer with Cam Newton leading Auburn back from 24 down on their way to a national title. That's also the last time Auburn won in Tuscaloosa, and they've fired 3 head coaches since. Gene Chizik, Gus Malzahn, and now Brian Harsin, who was let go after a 3-5 start this season. Former Tiger great Cadillac Williams was named interim head coach, thought of only as a placeholder. But who knows what could change if he leads the Tigers to a win over the Tide.
We are going to play football, Auburn football. And whether that's Dallas Cowboys, University of Alabama, the great Nick Saban, man, these kids not going to blink. We not blinking.
Interim, inexperienced coach on one side, and the greatest of all time on the other. Nick Saban won his first national title when Cadillac was starring in the Auburn backfield. Saban has won 6 more with Alabama, but after 15 years, there's now some uncertainty about whether the dynasty and the dominance might be coming to an end. Saban is under contract through 2030, but he'll be losing 2 of the top players in college football, Bryce Young and Will Anderson, playing their final game at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and perhaps their final college game period, with opt-outs looming for a likely non-playoff bowl game.
This is one of the biggest ones, and it means a lot to a lot of people in our state. It means a lot to us, our players, and our fans, and we're going to do the best job we can to get ready for this game.
It might not have SEC or playoff implications, but it's still the Iron Bowl, and it's on CBS. And taking a look at another good week for Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell against the spread. Brady now with a 2-game lead. How far do we go? Do we go into bowl season with this?
Why not?
Danny's good. Yeah, we go into bowl season. Going all the way through the playoff. Danny needs it too, because you are playing catch up with 2 games behind Brady Quinn, who is coming to us from his childhood bedroom today. He's covering the game, Ohio State and Michigan. Danny Kannell is in studio. I'm Chris Hassel. Let's start with the Iron Bowl. Bama's favored by 22, fellas. First off, Danny, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
If Bama wins, TCU loses, maybe a couple more things happen, does Alabama still have a shot at number 7?
They don't. I don't think so, but I think Nick Saban can sell his team that they do. And so that's where I think there's an interesting dynamic at play. I mean, and I also think Alabama with this committee and with any committee always resonates because of what they've done historically. This year, do they deserve it? Absolutely not. But again, anything goes where you have a committee of 12 or 13 people that get to choose who is the prettiest team, 4 teams around. That could be Alabama, which is a reason why I like Alabama in this game to go ahead and lay the points. Auburn here playing for bragging rights. Yes, Cadillac Williams has been inspiring, and they've had the place rocking. But this time, they're playing against the Alabama team that does have something to play for. And oh, by the way, you don't think Nick Saban's been telling his team what happened last year in the Iron Bowl when they almost had that massive letdown at the end of that game? I don't think Bryce Young lets it happen. I don't think the Alabama defense lets it happen. And Auburn, I think, is just too depleted across the board and outmanned across the board, where I think Bryce Young and company will have a field day against this defense. And the bigger picture is I don't know how Auburn's offense is going to put up many points against Alabama's defense. If they do, it'll be in garbage time. So I like the over there, but I think Alabama rolls in this one.
I'm with you here, Danny. I mean, look, forget about the motivational factors, because I don't really know that Alabama has a realistic shot of making it into the college football playoff. That being said, I do kind of get the feeling they are one of the 4 best teams in college football. They just unfortunately had a difficult schedule. You know, road losses against Tennessee on a final play, against LSU on a final play. Outside of that, they've actually handled what has been a difficult schedule pretty well. And they do have 2 of the best football players in college football, and Bryce Young at quarterback and Will Anderson at DN. So This one to me is easy. Not knowing whether or not Bryce Young and Will Anderson would opt out of a bowl game, given where Alabama will probably be and how meaningless that will be in the grand scheme of what they've been a part of now for the past decade in playing for national championships. I think this could be their last shot and last time to play together. And there is meaning in that. So I'll lay the 22 points here with Alabama. I also like the over along with Danny. Auburn's the worst in the SEC in turnover margin, too. Their defense doesn't do a great job of getting takeaways, and their offense turns it over too much. So, look, Cadillac Williams, he's been inspirational. However, I think this is the end of the road of providing much inspiration. It's not going to be here much in the Iron Bowl this week.
And again, that's the SEC Game of the Week on CBS. Big number in a rivalry game. Not as big as our next one, though. Georgia and Georgia Tech. The Bulldogs favored by 5 touchdowns, 35.5. And it's a Georgia Tech team, Danny, that's won 2 straight games against ranked opponents. They've been surprisingly good.
Yeah, they really have. And at 5-6, they're on the cusp of maybe getting bowl eligibility, but I don't think they get it. I don't think they win the game outright. But this team really has responded. Since the firing of Jeff Collins, Brent Key has stepped in. And for whatever reason, they have been impassioned. They have played a lot harder. They played a lot better despite having a litany of issues at quarterback and going to backup quarterback after backup quarterback, but somehow finding ways to win games. I don't think they win this game, but I do think 35.5 points is too many daggum points on principle alone in a rivalry game. Plus, when you look at Georgia on the other side of the ball, holding steady at that number 1 ranking, I think they have every incentive to get control of the game and then rest up guys and get ready for that SEC championship game because they have zero incentive to go out and get any sort of style points because they don't need them. So I think it'll be a very workmanlike, business-like approach. Maybe not that, in a rivalry you'd expect a team maybe to make it hurt a little more, run up the score. I don't think Kirby Smart has any incentive to do that. Shoot, they could win by 30, which is an impressive win, and still not cover. So I think it's too many points for me. I'll go ahead and take the Yellow Jackets and all those points.
I'm with you. Too many points. I get it. Georgia playing at home. But to your point, there's a chance some of these guys are going to be sitting out in the second half trying to rest up for that SEC championship matchup and paving their way into the college football playoff. That, and along with the fact that if you look at Georgia Tech last week, surprise win over North Carolina, this team's still playing in ball games. So I think you're looking at a second half backdoor cover. Zach Gibson, who's now is the third string quarterback playing for Georgia Tech, has played well on his spot duty thus far. So very good chance that ends up taking place. And as Danny just kind of touched on, a 30-point win is a dominating win. It's just not going to cover that gigantic number in this case.
Georgia, LSU in the SEC championship game next week, and LSU with a tough finish to the season. They're at Texas A&M. This is it for Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies. No bowl game, no matter what. The spread's only 10 here, and if A&M wins this game, that would totally end LSU's playoff hopes, right? I mean, even a 3-loss SEC champion, not getting in.
I don't think LSU gets in even if they beat Georgia, which is highly unlikely because of that loss to Tennessee at home, a 27-point loss. I think it's too much to overcome. But I actually think you mentioned something about Texas A&M not having a bowl game. This essentially becomes their bowl game. The bowl game is always the last time you take the field for a lot of upperclassmen. It's an opportunity to get young guys some playing time if it's a bowl game that doesn't really matter. This is one where I think Texas A&M has nothing to play for. Why not go out there, play some younger talent? The seniors, I think, will give you their best effort because they don't want to lose at home. And I don't expect a massive crowd, but College Station always is pretty well represented. And LSU, I did think I was impressed last week the way they handled their business against UAB. I did not see that coming, but I think this will be a different atmosphere. And again, I do wonder if they're starting to look ahead to that game versus Georgia in the SEC championship game. While we're all praising them, and deservedly so, I think they do have one last hurdle against a Texas A&M team that did take Alabama down to the wire, to a last point. So they've got the talent to put it together if they put up a fight. So I like the Aggies here with getting the 10 points.
Well, first off, Danny, I have no idea how you can be that positive about the type of attendance that the 12th man's going to bring there in College Station. I mean, go back and look at the stands last week versus UMass. There's barely anyone there. So I'm a little bit concerned as far as who's going to show up. Baton Rouge isn't too far away. Given LSU trying to play for an SEC championship and maybe a playoff berth, you're probably going to have more LSU fans there the way this season's gone for Texas A&M. And I'll also say this, I 100% believe the College Football Playoff Committee put LSU at number 5 to give them the opportunity to move up into the top 4 to play for a national championship if they win. There is no doubt in my mind they would be the first 2-loss Power 5 conference champion to make it in if they indeed beat A&M and then beat Georgia in the conference championship game. And that's one of the reasons, too, in this game, why I don't know that LSU needs to play for style points. Even if they get up on an A&M team that's really struggled this year, they need to rest up because their biggest matchup is next week versus Georgia. That's already set. And if they win that game, that's all that matters. They're not going to leave out a 2-loss SEC champ. They're just not going to do it. And for Texas A&M, you've got Devon Achane hopefully coming back. Evan Stewart, their outstanding freshman wide receiver, should be back for this one. Both missed their game last week versus UMass. So I think this is a defensive battle game. I think it's a low-scoring game. I love the under, but I'm also going to take the 10 points in Texas A&M here. As again, I think LSU is really more looking for that SEC championship game. That's the game that ultimately could get them into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something because I agree with Brady that if LSU wins the next two, they're in. Did you say if they win the next two, you don't think they will be?
I think the committee might give them that opportunity. I would make a case against them because you also have to consider who you're going to leave out then. Now, this is making
maybe a one-loss USC.
Zero chance they leave out USC as a one-loss Pac-12 champ. Zero chance.
What are we talking about? LSU has way better wins. I mean, it's not even close compared to USC. USC just got their first top 25 win this past week versus
They're about
UCLA.
to get two more, though.
We're saying that as a Florida State alum because you guys might lose to Florida this week. Some of us Notre Dame folks think that might actually beat USC or even Oregon beating the Pac-12. Regardless, if you compare LSU's resume to who they've beaten versus USC's, it's been much more impressive from LSU. And again, there's a reason why LSU resides at 5 as opposed to USC at 6. If that was the case, they already would have put USC ahead of LSU at number 5. It's not the case. So I hate to break it to you, Danny. You're going to see if LSU wins, if they beat Georgia, you're going to see 2 teams in the college football playoff from the SEC. Georgia will be at 4, and you'll see LSU move up to 3-2, somewhere in that ballpark.
Strong disagree. But I think, but that's assuming. See, I have very big concerns that TCU runs the table with what they have left. But I think Ohio State undefeated is locked. Georgia's a lock regardless of whatever happens. Then you've got if USC runs the table, that's a lock spot there. There's going to be there's a shortage of spots.
You're going to lock USC, a one-loss USC over a 2-loss SEC champion.
Absolutely. Their resume is better, and their loss was by 1 point on the road. They didn't lose at home by 27 points.
Teams. You only named 3 teams. You said Ohio State, Georgia, and USC if they win the Pac-12 and then
TCU.
They win the rest up. Well, that's assuming though that TCU wins out. I'm just saying if LSU beats Georgia, expect them to be in the playoff. There's no way they're going to leave them out. I'm sorry. They'll probably even bump out USC, or in that case, probably not an undefeated TCU because they're already in that spot. But you've got Ohio State and Michigan right now who are at 2 and 3. One of those is going to drop. I'm sorry. You're going to have LSU slide up into that number 4 spot.
I'm breaking the tie. I agree with Brady.
TCU was ranked 3rd.
I'm not saying I think it's right.
In 2014,
I'm just saying
and they dropped them regardless.
I think that's what the committee's going to do. I think LSU controls it.
No, that's a mistake. That's
chance.
A mistake for Danny. They didn't play a conference championship game that year, remember? That was the year of the one true champion, and the Big 12 couldn't decide. They had a tiebreaker between Baylor and TCU. Neither had the 13th game indicator. So they had tie champions. That's why they ended up getting dropped out.
All right, we'll be talking about that Notre Dame-USC game in just a little bit with Brady and Danny. Let's move on to another rivalry game, another team that's a college football playoff hopeful, but they have to hope for some upsets. It's the Clemson Tigers. They could end up as a one-loss ACC team. They're going to be rooting hard against the TCUs and the USCs. They've got South Carolina coming in feeling really good after putting up 60-plus on Tennessee.
Yeah, Spencer Rattler, after having 8 touchdowns on the entire season, all of a sudden he has 6, almost matching that total in the win against Tennessee. He was phenomenal. But I would like to point out something, just a small little detail. Tennessee's pass defense ranked 130th in the country. Not going to be the case there against Clemson on the road there for a home game for the Clemson Tigers. Clemson has everything to play for. Dabo here has been telling his team, everybody's doubting you, and they've handled their business since that Notre Dame loss, which was embarrassing and probably will prevent them from getting into the playoff. But at home, I expect Clemson to bully the South Carolina team. I don't think you'll get that version of South Carolina, and what I do think you'll get a healthy dose of is Will Shipley carrying the football, DJ Uyunglele, very efficient, not too prolific, but an efficient victory for Clemson covering that number.
The way I look at this game is, to your point, Clemson has everything to play for. For South Carolina, I'm shocked you didn't say this. It's a hangover game. I mean, come on. Now you got to go on the road and take on an in-state rival. Spencer Rattler plays his best game by far of the year, throwing 6 touchdown passes. In the previous 4 games, he threw 3 combined. Look, he's been inconsistent, and he's going up against the Clemson front that's one of the better fronts in college football. That defense ranks 18th nationally, so it's an uphill battle. Clemson's been 5-2 against the spread in their last 7 games, and as you pointed out, they've been better after they got drummed by Notre Dame physically. So you lay the points here with Clemson, and like I said, this is a hangover game for South Carolina.
Did you hear how he just added that? Just drummed by.
I think he's got his chest poked out. Got the
I mean,
Notre Dame
is
emblem
that
on.
was that not the case?
No, it was. You just like reminded everybody about it.
We're just happy that you're feeling so good about your team right now. Let's move on to Tennessee, the team that got drummed by South Carolina. Does the hangover game work the other way? I mean, you're a Tennessee team. You're thinking you win out, you go to the playoff, you lose that, playoff aspirations gone. Now you got to go to Vanderbilt, a team that's playing as well as they've played in a long time, maybe a decade.
Yeah, I think it is a battle of these two opposing forces. One comes in with all this momentum, having a couple signature wins, a ruckus storming of the field from the fans there in Nashville. Maybe you could describe it that way. I would describe it a different way. Mike Wright, their quarterback, throws 3 touchdowns in that game. I think Tennessee is vulnerable right here. I would even say I wouldn't be shocked if Vanderbilt won the game outright, looking for their 3rd win in a row. But I do think Tennessee's offense, even without Hendon Hooker, with Joe Milton stepping in, will be okay, will put up enough points. But the physicality of Vanderbilt better be something that Tennessee is ready for. I think they'll be up to it. But as I mentioned, that defense, especially through the pass game, is very vulnerable. So over 2 touchdowns here is way too many points for me. I'll take the Doors. I'll take our guy Barton Simmons. I'll take Clark Lee getting some momentum carried into this offseason for the Vanderbilt Commodores.
I'd love to be on the same side for this one for Clark Lee and Barton Simmons, but I'm not, because it's a hangover game for Vanderbilt. Yeah, that's right. After beating Kentucky last week, might be a little hungover there in Nashville. And now you've got, I don't want to call it an in-state rival because it's not really a rivalry between the two, but Tennessee coming in, and not necessarily with the team with so much to prove, but there is one guy who's got a lot to prove. That's Joe Milton. You just mentioned his name. 6 touchdowns, no interceptions, completing 70% of his passes in this system. Remember, that was the old Michigan quarterback. He transferred to Tennessee. Hendon Hooker now is moving on. And obviously terrible news that he tore his ACL. That's going to be a big loss to this offense. But he had higher aspirations looking at the NFL anyway. So this is really a tryout, really an opportunity, if you will, for Joe Milton to be the guy, especially considering some of the star-studded recruits that they've got coming in next year. So a big opportunity for Joe Milton to kind of carry on from the progress that he's built, a much improved passer from what we saw during his time at Michigan. But look, you kind of pointed out, it's been a great season for Vanderbilt and Clark Lee, and I think what they've built so far in this program, it does seem like a big number, but I just think that tempo and the speed really on the outside at wide receiver for Tennessee is going to be the difference in my mind. UT is 5-2 against the spread the last 7 games. They've been really good. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the points here. I think Tennessee takes care of business.
Vandy beat Kentucky. Vandy beat Florida. They haven't beaten 3 straight SEC opponents since 2013 when James Franklin was the head coach there. Florida and Florida State, Danny boy, what are you writing down there, pal?
I'm still going back to the playoff scenario that we were arguing about before.
Are you trying to figure out a way to get Florida State in the playoff?
No, I'm not. Although I think they could beat anybody in the playoff the way they're playing, especially Jordan Travis, who in the month of November has been the best quarterback in the country statistically. He's completing 81% of his passes in the month of November. 205 quarterback rating is number 1. Both of those ranked number 1. How about this? He's had 11 touchdowns he's accounted for and only 9 incompletions. You have to give a ton of credit to Mike Norvell and the staff for the development of their quarterback, which is a big reason why they've come out there. For the first time in about 5 or 6 years, I can watch this Florida State team and expect them to go out and handle their business when they're supposed to, as a heavy favorite again, even in a rivalry game. So I'll go ahead and lay the points with Florida State. I think they handle their business early. I was nervous before when they were playing on the road against the Miami Hurricanes, won that game 45-3. I will not be nervous again playing at home. Friday night, packed out house, a lot of excitement, looking to finish the season with an exclamation point, and I think they get it.
I'm on the other side of this one. I think it's a rivalry game. It will be close, although UF hasn't given me a ton of reason to be on their side for a lot of the reasons that Danny just talked about. Florida State, in Mike Norvell's program, as far as building it up, they're in such a better place right now. Jordan Travis is playing great. A lot of the athletes on defense are playing much better than Florida, who's 2-3 in the last 5 games. And last week got beat by Vanderbilt, by the way. I misspoke. Kentucky obviously had lost to Georgia the week prior. That was Vanderbilt's a couple weeks ago. That win over Kentucky. But I digress. This is a Florida team that's been highly inconsistent. It's probably something that you look to and expect Bill Napier's first year. But Anthony Richardson has been one of the brighter spots to me. I think at times early in the season, we saw some inconsistency in his passing game, but he's done a much better job of taking care of the football. In his first 6 games, threw 7 interceptions. Last 5, only 1. So I'm going to go ahead and take the points here. I think Anthony Richardson himself, much like Jordan Travis and how good he's been playing, I think Richardson actually keeps them in this game with his legs and with his arms to stay within that number at 9.5.
Florida State looking for their first 5-game winning streak since 2016. That one, as we mentioned, is on Friday. So is this next matchup in North Carolina. It's NC State and North Carolina, and UNC coming off that head-scratching loss to Georgia Tech.
Yeah, that was perplexing to say the least. Drake May, who had a chance to win the Heisman Trophy, might have lost his invitation to New York with that performance, but I do think he can play himself back in the conversation with a couple strong performances, specifically in an ACC championship game against Clemson. But you have one more massive hurdle to get through at home against NC State, a team that is a feisty opponent that is tired of hearing about North Carolina all season long. And despite playing with backup quarterbacks, just like Georgia Tech did, by the way, who beat North Carolina outright, I do think the defense is going to provide some problems, but I'm still not worried. I think Drake May will bounce back, but I have no idea what I'm going to get from this North Carolina defense. If I get what I've seen all year long, this game is going to be close and down to the wire, just like several ACC games have been for the Tar Heels. I think this one is another field goal game, just like it was against Miami, against Wake, against Duke. They're going to go down to the wire, so I'll go ahead and take NC State in those points, but I'll say the Tar Heels pull it out, and I do think it'll be a higher scoring affair because UNC's defense isn't very good, and I think the offense will put up some points.
I'm with you as far as the over. I feel much more confident about that, but remember, MJ Morris didn't play last week. You had freshman quarterback Ben Finley, so it could be a bit of a question mark as to what the offense looks like if MJ Morris doesn't play in this one. But you talked about, obviously, last week, UNC laying an egg. It's a bit of a concern here not to know how UNC is really going to look at this matchup. Yes, it's an in-state rivalry. That's meaningful in its own right. But the reality is they've got an ACC championship game coming up in another week from now trying to beat Clemson. So depending on how this game goes, or even if they get up by a couple touchdowns, do they start to rest some guys? Do they start to prepare for that ACC championship game? Concerns me a little bit. So like I said, I think you need to find out more of whether or not MJ Morris ends up playing in this game. His dual threat ability, both throwing the ball downfield, but obviously able to run, I think versus the North Carolina defense that's just been woeful this year, would be a big-time difference maker in whether or not NC State can keep this close. If I have to, I'll take the 6 points or 6.5 points, but I think the over is the best bet.
All right. Again, that one Friday. There's also a game in college football on Thursday, and it's the Egg Bowl. It's been an interesting week in Oxford. Some distractions out there with Lane Kiffin reportedly, potentially going to Auburn. He squashed that, at least for now, on Twitter. His team is a slight favorite at home.
Well, he talked to the team, too. He said there wasn't an offer, so you'd believe him, right? Can we believe college coaches anywhere? Not just Lane Kiffin.
Never.
To me, there is one word that every head coach cannot stand and doesn't want to see it become a part of preparation, and that's distraction. And this week has been one massive distraction after another, with rumors cropping up, with their head coach tweeting, with people putting out information. Where is Lane Kiffin going to go? Who is he going to bring with him? I would have to imagine that has been distracting for these players as they get prepped for this game. Meanwhile, Mike Leach's squad is probably tired of hearing all about Ole Miss and how they got ranked in the top 10, and yet they've lost 3 games in a row and come limping into this game after another rough loss versus Arkansas. I think Mike Leach gets his first Egg Bowl win in this one with an offense that are prolific and a defense that I think will be ready to slow down that Ole Miss rushing attack. So I like Mississippi State here. I like them to win the game outright with Mike Leach getting that first win.
I'm with you, Danny. I feel like Ole Miss, I'm not going to say they're fraudulent, but if you really look at losing 3 of the last 4, it's been mostly versus stiffer competition. They have not really held up. I think Jackson Dart, they had high aspirations of what he could be in the passing game. He's only thrown for over 280 yards twice this season. It's a bit surprising when you think about a Lane Kiffin system that isn't necessarily comparable to like a Mike Leach air raid with what Will Rogers can do at Mississippi State, but he has been able to find quarterbacks who can put up some numbers in years past. So it's been surprised they've had to hang their hat so much on the rushing attack with Quinshon Judkins and Zach Evans, which I do think when you're one-dimensional, a little bit easier than find a way of stopping them. And Mississippi State does have a decent rush defense. So I think Will Rogers and Mississippi State can keep this one razor close, if not outright win it. I mean, I think when the head coach of the opposing team's son is reaching out to get that opposing quarterback's autograph or whatever, memorabilia from after the game, like Lane Kiffin's son did with Will Rogers, I don't know if it's a little gamesmanship or just the fact that he's got that much respect for how good that player is. Either way, I'll go ahead and take the 2 points here in Mississippi State. I actually like the over, though. I think with Mississippi State and Ole Miss, both these teams can score some points. So I think this one could end up playing where you see both teams in the 30s.
A lot of points in that one, probably not in our next one. Number 25, Louisville, is at Kentucky, and the total in this one is just 43.
Yeah, I think this has been a tremendous year for Scott Satterfield. I mean, they started off rough, losing to Syracuse. Everybody's panicked. Maybe Scott Satterfield should be on the hot seat. Then they lose to Florida State 2 weeks later after a kind of a weird win against UCF. They started 1-2. Again, hot seat conversation. What we didn't know was Syracuse was going to be much better, and so was Florida State. And Louisville has been a tough out all season long, turning it around where they're 1 win away from an 8-win season for Scott Satterfield, who, if you remember, took a ton of heat for flirting with another job. The administrators had to back him. It was a little bit controversial. Even without Malik Cunningham, they've still been a defense that has been tough to contend with. So I like the Cardinals here. And talk about a team that had a lot of expectations coming in, potentially being that second-best team in the SEC East. They have fallen much short of that. Will Levis, the much ballyhooed quarterback, supposed to be a top 5 pick, has not delivered as far as on the field where that has belonged and mattered the most. They've come up short. So I think Louisville wins this game outright. If I can get 3 points, I'll take them all day long.
I think the best play in this game is the under. Malik Cunningham missed last week. Brock Doman ended up filling in for him. Doman's more of a drop-back quarterback. Doesn't have the same type of athleticism that Malik Cunningham does. So until you know the status of Cunningham, I would hold off at least placing a bet on the spread. If Cunningham doesn't play, I think you lay the 3 points easily here with Kentucky. If Cunningham does play, maybe a little bit different story how you see this one playing out. Usually, though, under Mark Stoops, you see a lot of unders hit, which, by the way, if Mark Stoops wins this game, and they'll obviously go to a bowl game and wins that, that's another 8-win season for Mark Stoops. That's 8 wins or more in 4 of the last 5 seasons. As far as Kentucky football goes, that's unprecedented. So if there's anyone out there questioning the extension he just received, it's in part probably because he had other people knocking on his door, but also because they've actually been a lot better than we've given them credit when you look at the stability and consistency he's created within this program. Scott Satterfield's done a tremendous job keeping his job, I think, this year. This team has really rallied and started to play for him. I think their defense, along with the inability for Kentucky to score points offense, makes me love the under. But I'll go ahead and lay the 3 points there until there's more clarity in the quarterback situation there for Louisville.
Both on the under in that one. Quite a bit of agreement in our first batch of games that we're picking this week in college football. Agreement on Alabama in the over in the Iron Bowl. That's locked unity. Both like Georgia Tech against Georgia, lock unity in LSU and the A&M. It's A&M in the under and lock unity for NC State plus 6.5 and the over 56 at North Carolina. Only 2 ranked games in the Big Ten. The one on top is for almost everything. Michigan and Ohio State, the winner will go to the Big Ten championship game and will be 1 win away from a sure bid to the college football playoff. Also, Penn State is home against Michigan State. Chris Hassel joined by Danny Kannell, and Brady Quinn is out there in Ohio getting ready to cover this game. Brady, biggest question has to be the health of Blake Corum going into this game.
It's Blake Corum and it's Donovan Edwards, who obviously is the other running back that plays a role in all of this, maybe even the faster of the two. But there's no doubt about it. The Heisman Trophy candidate in Blake Corum and his health and status is the biggest concern, I think, for Michigan. If they don't have him and even Donovan Edwards in the backfield, they lose a lot of that offensive firepower. It puts a lot of pressure on J.J. McCarthy, who really hasn't been tested yet this season. Now, earlier this week, we did see Blake Corum walking around, passing out turkeys, utilizing some of that NIL money to do good in the community. And it's hard to tell because he's wearing sweats, but he didn't seem to be walking with a limp. So curious as to, with that footage getting out, if that's maybe Michigan with some gamesmanship or if it's legit. And Blake Corum was pulled out of last week's game knowing that he's going to have a shot and want to keep him healthy for this big time matchup. But this game's about a couple of things. I think it's going back to last year, looking at how Michigan physically dominated Ohio State. And then really for Ohio State, proving how far they've come, in particular as a defense, to be able to stop the rushing attack of Michigan. The hiring of defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, the physicality that I think he's brought and the demeanor he's brought to that defense. Some of their star players, too. Tommy Eichenberger's really stood out at linebacker for them this year. JT Tuimoloau, who's been phenomenal, too, off of the edge in the variety of ways in which he plays. This will be a test for them, and probably the first really true test of a team that can run the football like Michigan can, and has the best offensive line, in my opinion. Michigan won the Joe Moore Award Offensive Line of the Year, which goes to the best offensive line in the country last year. I think they're better this year. And their defense has been just as stingy this year, although I don't know if they have the same type of star power. And I think that's the difference in this game. It's ultimately going to be the inability for Michigan to match up with the wide receivers on the outside, Marvin Harrison Jr. in particular, for Ohio State. And I think J.J. McCarthy, who, again, hasn't been tested in the passing game, is going to have a hard time keeping pace. This game's in Columbus. It's going to be a crazy environment. I expect Ohio State to cover this number, but I do think it hits the under when it's all said and done.
I'm with you. A lot of the same reasons. I think the better quarterback is C.J. Stroud. J.J. McCarthy, I thought we were going to get a little bit more explosive. So if you had issues with your running back, it wouldn't matter that much. But we haven't seen that. So if you do have those depth issues at Michigan, that's going to put a lot more on J.J. McCarthy, who for 3 games in a row has completed around 50% of his passes and thrown around 200 yards. That's not enough firepower to get it done. And I do think, like you mentioned, Ryan Day specifically addressed the issues on the defensive side of the ball for this game specifically. And Ohio State is more battle-tested. They've been in tougher games on the road. I know last week both of them struggled, but again, Michigan was at home versus Illinois, and Ohio State was on the road at Maryland. Ohio State was in a tougher game against Notre Dame earlier this year. They were on the road in a battle against Penn State. Michigan has not been tested in a fourth-quarter game this year. The schedule has been as light as anybody's in the country. I think that matters. I think Ohio State is better, more physical than they were last year, and I trust that firepower. Plus, the issues at running back haven't bothered them one bit because they plug in another guy every time, and he still goes off. So I like the Buckeyes as well, and I do think Michigan will struggle to put up points, and I think Ohio State's defense has a chance to shine. So I lay the points as well with the Buckeyes.
There are other Big Ten games going on, though it doesn't seem that way. There's only one other ranked Big Ten team, and that's Penn State at home against Michigan State. Danny, Penn State, they lost to both Michigan and Ohio State, but since then, 3 wins, all by 30-plus.
Yeah, but I think this is an interesting game because I do think Michigan State, again, the news came out earlier today about the 7 players getting charged, but they're not on the team, so I don't think that's going to impact the game. But what I do think is Michigan State trying to salvage a season and ruin Penn State. While I think Penn State is good, they're strong, I think they'll win this game. But to me, this is too many points in a rivalry game where I think Michigan State plays a chip on their shoulder. Penn State just wants to get a win to kind of cap off the season. Style points don't really matter. So I'll take Sparty and all those points in this game.
Penn State's been on a roll since that loss to Ohio State. They've covered, I believe, every single one of their games since that loss. And I think this is a bad matchup for Michigan State when you look at their inability to stop the run. I mean, hell, last week they gave up over 240 rushing yards to Indiana. I mean, Indiana doesn't even try to run the football. Now, granted, Connor Bazelak wasn't in a quarterback. It was Dexter Williams, but still. I mean, and it's hard to tell really what this Michigan State team is this year. You go knock off a team like Illinois, who's a top 25 ranked team in Champaign, and you turn around and lose to a team like Indiana. They're incredibly inconsistent. I'm not sure what to expect out of Michigan State in this matchup. I do expect this. They're going to try to run the football with Jalen Berger. Obviously, Penn State's going to try to do the same because they've got 2 freshman running backs who are outstanding. And that's been more of their MO on offense this year. That's a weak point for Michigan State. So I love the under. I think this is a fast game, and it's one in which Penn State ends up, handling their business on the ground. But if I had to, I'll take the 18 points. It seems like a really big number for a conference matchup this time of year between 2 teams that, again, really not sure what to expect from Michigan State.
And the land-grant trophy, maybe the ugliest trophy in sports. I think they did it on purpose. Lock unity in that game between Ohio State and Michigan, and also both the guys on Michigan State, plus 18 at Penn State. HQ presented by Shell. We're picking every college football ranked game against the spread. TCU is only favored by 10 at home against an Iowa State team that only has 1 win in conference play. Kansas State's going to try to join them in the Big 12 championship game with a win over Kansas or a Texas loss to Baylor. That game is on Friday. Going to pick them with Danny Kannell and Brady Quinn, and we're starting with TCU. They seem to have to come from behind each and every fourth quarter, and while Iowa State only has one conference win, they have a lot of losses, but only one of them by more than 7 points.
Remember I told you out of principle I wasn't going to take a favorite if it was over a touchdown?
Right.
I lied. I think TCU actually gets this one done, and they handle their business. I think a lot of that pressure was kind of pulled off them last week, and what a confidence boost for them yet again on the road to execute that last possession perfectly, running that field goal unit on, kicking that field goal through the uprights. And unfortunately for Matt Campbell, as close as they've been, I think it kind of comes and you see a little bit of a talent disparity here between those two teams. So I like TCU to win big. I don't think there's going to be another game where they need the fourth quarter comeback. I think this is just a final tune-up for them against the Iowa State team that feels depleted and not as strong as it's been in years past.
This one was tough for me to pick against the spread, in part because of all the injuries. Darius Davis didn't play last week. He's the lead punt returner, one of the top wide receivers with a hand injury. Quinshon Johnston went out last week with an ankle injury that he's been dealing with. And Kendra Miller is one of the better running backs in the Big 12, also went out in that game. Now, they've got some depth at TCU, but it's just hard to overcome, especially versus the number one defense in Iowa State. And that defense does travel. And not to mention Hunter Deckers to Xavier Hutchinson. That's actually the best connection in the Big 12. Hutchinson has been as clutch as any wide receiver making plays, and this TCU defense has been known to give up some big plays. So wasn't quite as keen on the spread here. I'll lay the 10 points with TCU at home, even though they've had to come back a number of times in the second half in games this season. They are 8-2-1 against the spread. I think the under is the best bet in this one, though.
Max Duggan, Iowa native, 0-3 in his career against Iowa State, lost by 34 last year. Kansas and Kansas State. If Kansas State wins this, they're in the Big 12 championship game no matter what. They clinch a berth with either a win here or a Texas loss to Baylor on Friday, so they're going to know what they need to do.
Yeah, they're going to know what they're going to need to do, but it's not going to be easy. And I think Lance Leipold should be considered for the Coach of the Year conversation. He won't, because the Cinderella story ended a little bit prematurely. But if you look at the expectations versus what actually occurred this year, he's done a phenomenal job. And Jalen Daniels, his quarterback, is coming back. I think he's healthier. I think that presents some problems for Kansas State. I think this will be a game that comes down to the wire. I think Kansas State wins and does go on to play in the Big 12 championship game, but Kansas is going to make it tough on them. So that's too many points for me in a rivalry game.
I'm right there with you. I mean, Kansas, I think with Jalen Daniels now back, we saw him back last week versus Texas, just adds a different element and creativity to this offense, especially when you see him and Jason Bean, their backup quarterback who tends to play sometime on the field at the same time in the game. And that makes it tough for Chris Klieman and his staff to be able to prepare for this. So I do think Kansas will put up a pretty good fight in this one with Jalen Daniels now back and playing. But for Kansas State, I mean, it's hard not to love what you've seen from this team. I mean, outside of playing, some of the more top-ranked 25 teams, that's the only losses they've even had this year. So whether it's Will Howard, Adrian Martinez, they've found ways to win games. You got to give them a lot of credit. So Kansas State wins this, they go on to the Big 12 championship, but that 12 points is a lot for a rivalry game like this. So I'll go ahead and take the 12 points. I like the under.
Meantime, on Friday, Texas hosts Baylor. And Texas, they need to win this, and they need a Kansas win over Kansas State. Bijan Robinson ran all over Kansas last week.
I think the critical thing in this one and why I like Texas is the timing of the game. You mentioned it. They play on Friday. They don't know the outcome of the Kansas State-Kansas game. They still have hope that they potentially could play for a Big 12 championship, which would be an unbelievable story for Sark in year two after some of the adversity they faced this year and some of the losses. I think you're going to get their best dose, and I also question where Baylor's going to be mentally, coming off that rough loss, feeling like they had the game won, and then just getting a dagger through the heart, losing to TCU at home. I wonder how much is left for them in this game, and I think you're going to see Bijan Robinson once again go off. So I'll take the Longhorns and lay those points.
I think you'll see Bijan Robinson go off. I also think you're going to see Craig Williams go off and Richard Reese, the running backs for Baylor. Both these teams can really run the football well. It's one of the reasons why I love the under in this game, because I think it's going to be more of a defensive battle. But I'll go ahead and take the 8.5 points. I think Baylor is able to keep this within the number. I mean, David Aranda's built a program there where this group has some grit. They have some fight to them. They obviously covered last week, taking on TCU at home. I think the toughest thing is now it's 2 weeks in a row losing for Baylor. Now you have to get right back on the road, go take on a talented Texas team. But like I said, I'll take the 8.5 points, but I think the under is the best play.
All right, both on the under on that game. They did have a lock unity in the Big 12. Kansas against Kansas State. They like the 12 points that Kansas is getting in Manhattan, and also the under 62.5, and both on TCU -10 at home against Let's look at the Pac-12 slate of games this week. Most of the games on Saturday, but UCLA at Cal is a Friday game. Ranked matchup between Oregon and Oregon State, and the big one is at the Coliseum. USC, playoff hopeful, hosting Notre Dame. Danny Kannell and Brady Quinn are here. We will go to Brady first. He's got his Notre Dame gear on. Brady, you're getting 5.5 points. You gonna step out and take the money line pick here?
Why not? I mean, come on. Notre Dame's gotten on a roll lately as they found their identity. I also think this is quite the contrast of styles between these two teams. Notre Dame, clearly the more physical team, looking at the line of scrimmage up front. They will beat you up running the football. Defensively, they're getting after it. Isaiah Foskey just set the sack record for Notre Dame for his career last week. And they've got some young emerging stars that are playmakers. Ben Morrison now has 5 interceptions in the last 3 games as a freshman cornerback. Brandon Joseph, who's missed some time, their talented safety that was a transfer from Northwestern, he'll be back for this game. So I love Notre Dame in this spot. The USC defense has been atrocious this year. The only thing they've been good at is really getting turnovers. And obviously, the USC offense hasn't been turning over the football. So I don't think there's any doubt at all in my mind that Notre Dame stays in this game and covers that number. But I'll go ahead and outright take them on the money line as well. Look, they already ruined the ACC's chance of getting the playoff, beating Clemson and USC. Why not add to it and go ahead and beat USC and ruin the Pac-12s as well while you're at it?
They would, absolutely. That would put a damper in the USC spirits for sure. I'm going to go on the other side of this one. I was kind of back and forth, but I was looking at Notre Dame's schedule, seeing what was the best quarterback they faced. Yes, they faced C.J. Stroud, but I think Caleb Williams is a whole nother level. And I think DJ Uyunglele for Clemson, has shown he's got his limitations as well. The one thing Caleb Williams can do, he can throw from the pocket, he can improvise, he can make plays with his legs, as we saw against UCLA, accounting for 500 yards of total offense. And then I think USC's defense is clearly a liability. But if you're USC, I would expect them to try to load up and say, Drew Pine, you beat us through the air. And they still might give up some yards on the ground. They have not been great, but I don't think it'll be enough. I think USC offensively will get better play from Caleb Williams, Jordan Addison, and the rest of weapons that he's got to work with. I think they can sense they're on the verge of something special, and I think they get it done at home.
Hold on, but besides Caleb Williams, who's the next best quarterback? You're talking about the top 2 quarterbacks for the Heisman Trophy right now. You weren't impressed by how they were able to not only cover that number, but pretty much hang tough with Ohio State's pass game in week 1?
No doubt about it. And how did that game work out? They lost by more than 5. That's all I need.
They lost by more than 5.
Covered,
they lost by more than 5.
They covered.
They covered, and they lost by more than 5 in regards to the rushing attack of Ohio State, which is a little bit of a different story. Well, by the way, I have to mention Michael Mayer at some point because he'll be key in this game. He's the best tight end in college football. At some point, too, the play action, the different ways that Tommy Rees finds ways of getting Michael Mayer the football will be impactful in this game as well.
SC is in the Pac-12 championship game regardless. They will take on Oregon if Oregon can go into Corvallis and take on the Beavers, who are also ranked. It's the first time in 10 years that both of these teams are ranked when they play.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Smith has done an outstanding job building a physical football team that likes to run the football. Corvallis, very tough place to play. I think the Civil War is going to be just like a lot of them, where it's a chance to ruin your opponent's season. And I also am concerned a little bit about Oregon in this spot. The injury to Bo Nix, I don't know if he's 100% healthy yet. Matchup-wise, I don't know if I love their chances to match the physicality of this Oregon State team. So I'll take the Beavers. I'll take those points. And I think you could see, like we've seen a lot of times in the Pac-12, you have all these teams in the playoff conversation and they kind of start playing each other and they get knocked out of it. I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon State wins the game outright.
I could have gone either way on this one, sitting at 3 points. And so I'll go ahead and take the 3 points, the home underdog here in Oregon State. Look, they're running back by committee with Damian Martinez running the football, kind of helps keep the pace of the game. They don't want to put in Ben Gilbranson's hands, even though he's done a good job taking care of the football for Oregon State. He's not going to lead the way in this one. So I actually think with the way Oregon can run the football too, the under's the best play here. But like you said, Oregon had a huge win last week versus Utah. Their defense stepped up in a huge way. Their pass defense was atrocious for the majority of this year, but they picked off Cam Rising 3 times. And Bo Nix, you talked about his health. He really carried him last week. Typically Oregon runs the football better, but they got stymied by Utah. It was Bo Nix through the air over 280 yards. that helped lead them there to that victory. So kind of wonder if this is a hangover game for Oregon after what was a big win last week. So I'll go ahead and take the 3 points here, but the under is the best play.
All right, so if Oregon loses, then Washington has a chance to get into the Pac-12 championship game, but they're in a tough one in the Apple Cup in a near toss-up.
This is one of the more underrated rivalries in college football, and I think it's going to be another fascinating game to see unfold. One thing Washington needs to do, they need to go on the road and win. What did we see him do in Eugene? We saw him go on the road to win. Michael Penix has been maybe the comeback player of the year, if there was an award for it, for how far his career had kind of fallen off at Indiana. Then he reunites with Kalen DeBoer and is leading the country in passing yards. He's been sensational. I think it'll be too much in this situation. I like Washington, who also, I think they feel like the disrespected team in the Pac-12, the forgotten about team who still has a chance to play for the Pac-12 title. I'd keep an eye on them if they do win this one, and we do see some of these events unfold. They would be a really tough out for USC. So I'll go ahead and take the Huskies here.
I'm right there with you. I'm laying the 2 points here in Washington on the road. I do think it's going to hit the under, though. If you look at UW games, 3 of the last 4 have hit the under. The other one was actually a push. They're a better defense than people give them credit because Michael Penix and the offense seem to get all of the attention. And this is a Washington State defense that does give up a fair amount of yards in the passing game, about 250 per game. So I do think Michael Penix will have his way while UW shuts down Nakia Watson, the lead running back there for Washington State in this one. And let's not forget, historically, Washington has dominated the Apple Cup. They won 7 of the last 8, and then even going all the way back to its origin, they've won the vast majority of these matchups. So I'm rolling with UW here.
Yeah, they had their 7-game winning streak snapped last season by Wazoo. Utah is out of the running for the Pac-12 championship. They were eliminated with their 3-point loss at Oregon on Saturday, and they're getting a huge number at Colorado, a team that's lost 30 straight against AP top 15 teams.
Have you watched Colorado play this year?
I have,
yes,
for a few minutes, and that was enough.
Yeah, just lay them with Utah and don't even think twice about it. That's about as simple as I can put it.
I'm with you.
Right?
Colorado's in a rough spot. I actually, just because the number was so big and you've got a home underdog like this, thought maybe Colorado would be able to keep this one competitive. But I kept looking at the numbers and looking at tape and going, there's no way. There's just no way. I think it's a bounce-back game for Cam Rising, who had arguably his worst performance of the season last week versus Oregon. I think they get back on track. They win this with a big number, but also I like the over. I know I've got the under down there in the screen, but I actually think this one hits the over between these two teams.
6 Pac-12 teams in the college football playoff rankings. UCLA is number 18, and they're on the road at Cal as well. And Cal's been feisty this season.
Yeah, that's why I like Cal in this one as a 10-point underdog. And you have to consider UCLA coming off that heartbreaking loss where DTR is crying on the field after he throws that interception late to lose the game for the Bruins. They've got to get up and match that energy in what's going to be a sleepy environment at Cal. You mentioned Justin Wilcox, the job he's done. They have been competitive almost in every game. I think they give UCLA their best punch, and I think it'll be enough to keep it inside this number. I think UCLA will win this game, but I think it's going to be a sloppy start, and I think it's going to give Cal some hope to hang around late. So I think Cal covers that number.
I'm right there with you. The home underdog, go ahead and give me those 10 points. Justin Wilcox does as good of a job as anyone scheming up things defensively with the talent that he has. And as we saw last week for DTR, as special as he is as a player, he does have the propensity to kind of throw the football into traffic, turn the football over, make some poor decisions from time to time. That's unfortunately been the storybook for him, and I do think that's going to reveal itself in this game. Jack Plummer, I think, has been effective in the passing game for Cal. Even though their offense isn't one of the most prolific, he's capable going up against the pass defense for UCLA that really struggled. I mean, obviously it's going to versus USC, but the entire season. And then Jay Knott adds some balance to as a freshman running back. So I think this game is one where Cal covers, closer game, but also the under here.
Lock unity, Cal in the under against a UCLA team that's also been eliminated from Pac-12 title contention. They also love Oregon State and the under, along with Utah minus 29.5 and the under. All right, the group of 5 automatic berth to the Cotton Bowl this year is all coming down to 3 teams. The winner of the Tulane-Cincinnati game and likely UCF a heavy favorite at South Florida. So let's start with that Friday game, Tulane and Cincinnati. Danny Kannell, Brady Quinn picking it. Winner of this game is going to host the AAC championship game, and the loser will be eliminated.
This game was one of the tougher ones for me to pick of the entire slate. You look at the job that Willie Fritz has done on the season around his quarterback. Michael Pratt's been fantastic. Cincinnati comes in. Ben Bryant, their quarterback, did leave the game last week, but I'm going to go ahead and lean to the home team. Nippert's one of the tougher places to play, and because of what you mentioned, Chris, what's at stake here? A chance to host a championship game. I trust Luke Fickell, having been in this spot before, to get it done at home. The Cincinnati defense, I think, will step it up. So I'll go ahead and lay the 2 in a lower scoring game.
Do you think both Cincinnati and Tulane will be able to put up some points, even though they're both known for their defensive acumen? But I'm with you. I think Cincinnati at home, I'll go ahead and lay those 2 points. They're obviously going to win this thing, but I think it might be more handily than that. And I mean, bottom line, Ben Bryant, I think he'll be able to get through this one and be able to play. He's going to have to, I think, if they have any shot at playing in the AAC. But defensively, to me, Cincinnati's been the more consistent team all year. Tulane last week, great win, put up a lot of points versus SMU. Obviously got that game wrong. It's going to be a different challenge here in this one.
And again, I said that the loser is going to be eliminated because I'm just assuming that UCF is going to handle USF. The Bulls, 1-21 over the last 3 seasons in conference. UCF would clinch a berth with a victory.
I don't trust UCF. They've been a little bit inconsistent at quarterback. USF, since they fired Jeff Long, has been more competitive. We've seen some shocking performance from them. Coach Trickett's done a nice job with the offense, kind of creating something out of nothing on their 3rd and 4th string quarterback, but they've actually shown some signs of life, which I think they do in this one. I think UCF wins this one, but I'm going to go ahead and take all those points in what is a little bit of an in-state rivalry between these two schools.
I mean, look, UCF should have won last week versus Navy. That to me just threw everything out the window as far as being able to buy into them covering a big number, in particular on the road. They're playing in Tampa. So I'll go ahead and take those 19.5 points here with USF. I think they'll be able to run the football effectively enough to hang around in this one. Not saying they win by any means, but keep it close enough to cover this number. I also think the under, when you look at the 69 points here, I don't think USF's going to score a ton, but I also know that UCF is going to be able to score a ton, especially after watching the tape this past week versus Navy.
Can't we just call them South Florida and Central Florida? I hate the UCF, USF. Come on!
It's all about branding. Come on.
Oh, just give me a break. Sorry if I offended you at those schools. Cincinnati is the pick, -2 at home against Tulane, and it's lock unity for USF plus 19.5 and the under 69. Let's get the best bets from Brady and Danny, and it is rivalry week. Danny, you're going to a big rivalry.
I am. I'm going to go with the Texas Longhorns. We talked about them coming in. They think they have a chance to get the Big 12 championship game, but depending on what happens the next day against Kansas State, Baylor comes limping in. I think you see a healthy dose of Bijan Robinson, who will run the ball all over this Baylor defense. So give me the Texas Longhorns, heavy favorite, but lay 'em.
I'm going to the Apple Cup, getting loose on the Palouse. Although there's not going to be much action on the Palouse. In fact, it'll be a lower scoring game. It usually is. These are 2 good defenses in the Pac-12. University of Washington, obviously Washington State. So lower scoring affair. I think it hits the under of 61. That's my best bet.
Oh, what a weekend for Brady. He gets to be back home, gets to cover the game.
Yeah.
And he's got
Sleep
Notre
in his
Dame
old
taking
bed.
on USC. And Danny, how about you? You got Florida State. Should knock off Florida, finish off a great year.
Better.
These are the lock unity picks, 9 of them this week. Tons of agreement. Rivalry week.
Wow, that is a lot of agreement.
And it's the last week of the regular season in college football. For Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell, I'm Chris Hassel. Happy Thanksgiving weekend, everybody.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.